Okay, so I got there a couple months ago. I got a few throws over that distance, and I have all the footage from the attempt. And counting from the first day I got the previous record, it took me 62 max distance attempts to get 3 throws over 120 meters, which is roughly a 5% success rate, which means that it was basically a useless distance in an actual golf situation. So my next goal was to get that consistency up. And in the process I also got a new personal record. But first, okay, I'm driving south to Vantaa to go see Jyrki. He's a disc golf form coach, and he saw the previous video about my disc golf journey and he became really interested in the simulations and a few other things. So he contacted me and we had an interesting video call about many things. One of which was that he agreed to coach me if I came to Vantaa. And I was like, heck yeah, I'm all in. I'll drive there and we'll see if you can make me better. But it's a long drive, so I'll see you when I get there.
Hi all, it's Jyrki Ruuskanen from heittamaan.fi. I offered myself to help that guy over there to continue his progress.
Okay, we've now had a couple sessions, and what I find interesting is that you didn't just look at my throw and then start correcting things here and there. Instead you have a completely different approach. Can you tell me something about it?
Yeah, the coaches you see on YouTube, they usually try to fix your throw right there on the spot. And I think that is very hard for people, and it's also very frustrating. And the reason for that is because the throw is complex. It's a difficult movement. And you can't just tell people to change things in that movement and then expect them to remember them next day or just feel natural about the changes. So my approach is that instead of doing the whole movement, we just do parts of the movement or parts of the throw as individual movements. And those movements are much easier to learn, much easier to practice.
So we had a great time at Vantaa. Huge thanks to Jyrki, he was very generous with his time. And so I came back home. I was very eager to get practicing all these new cool things, but I immediately got frustrated with my throwing area. I bought that net some time ago and I've been practicing here. I just threw this old particle board on the ground and called it a day. But yeah, it's way too small, the stump is in the way, and it's not really a good place to practice at. So I wanted to do a bit of a makeover for this throwing area. And I started out by clearing up the area a little bit. And I started making this frame for a new proper teepad. I had a lot of leftover wood from our house's construction, and with that I built this nice looking frame. So I put it into place and installed these leftover log pieces underneath it to raise it up a bit above the stump in the middle, and started installing these boards as a surface. And after that was done, I decided to put down a quick coat of leftover paint, which I knew wouldn't probably be very durable with me throwing on it all the time. But I thought it'll at least add some UV protection, maybe make it last a little longer. And then I found this pretty cheap €50 speed radar from a local Biltema. I didn't know they make these kind of cheaper speed radars. I've always wanted one of those fancy expensive ones. Jyrki had one like this at his home in Vantaa, so I had to get one for me too. These are some of my first throws on this new teepad, and it's so much better and so much nicer. It's amazing how much this kind of good throwing area can improve your practice when you can just step out the door and have this right in front of you. It made a huge difference for me. For the entire summer I was out there throwing almost every evening. And yeah, the radar seems to work surprisingly well. Obviously I don't have anything to sort of verify the accuracy, but it seems to be very much consistent enough to be useful in this kind of practice. Okay, back to practicing. So what Jyrki taught me is all these individual movements or sequences, and the idea is that by practicing them separately from the throw, they sort of become automatic, and then they can just seep into the actual complete throw almost by themselves, without all that much conscious movements. The one exercise that stuck with me more than anything else was this. Just a simple quick extension of the elbow, straight out like this, and then letting the hand snap itself shut at the end. It simulates the very end of the throw where the disc leaves the hand, but taking just the elbow and hand parts and leaving everything else out. The idea is to learn the timing of this so that all the energy goes to the hand and the fingers at the end, so you don't hurt your elbow at all when it snaps open like this. And the hand snap at the end is so that you can keep your grip relatively loose all the way to the actual release, where you will then naturally snap your hand tighter and have a strong grip. And this exercise is actually pretty tricky to do well. It took me a long time to figure it out. But once you get it, it's pretty addictive. I often find myself doing this everywhere, or taking an abbreviated throw movement and incorporating it into that. So at this point, having made the new throwing area, my max release speed was 86 kilometers an hour. And having the instant feedback of the radar, it didn't take long to hit 90 for the first time, just by throwing a lot and adjusting to the new setup. But then I started making changes to my form again, and one big thing Jyrki pointed out in my form was that when I was turning my shoulder forward, like I was talking about in the previous video, I was doing a lot of this. I believe this muscle is called the trapezius, so I was tensing up my trapezius and pulling the shoulder up when turning it forward and raising the arm. And that was really bad because it made my form a lot more tense than it needed to be. And it also seemed to pull my head into the movement a lot more, which is also bad. It's more efficient to focus your attention to the release point instead of taking the attention to where the disc is going. And at first it was surprisingly difficult to uncouple the trapezius from this movement, but I found a weird little mental note that helped me a lot. I started doing this movement where instead of raising up the entire arm, I'm thinking of sort of swiveling the upper arm up with the forehand, like this. And at the same time I visualize a lot of open space and air here between the head and the shoulder. And for me that really helped in getting the feel for the open and relaxed shoulder movement. So after a couple weeks of practice, I finally got the idea of not rotating your head with the throw, but letting it be more loose and focused on the release point. My max release speed went up a bit to around 95 kilometers an hour. And then one evening when I was throwing at the net again, I was trying out different grips since I felt like I was losing some power to my current grip. I felt like the disc is slipping out of my hand a bit too early, and I was also losing contact with my thumb when the disc is doing the final speed up. And then something just suddenly clicked about the grip of the disc. I was holding the disc something like this before, and what I did was I placed the thumb much more inwards on the flight plate, and I changed from doing this to doing this. A very small looking change, but if I exaggerate a little bit, the disc was something like this before, and then I changed it to be more like this, and then just started using my wrist more to control the angle. And I don't know, obviously I knew about the fan grips and power grips and all that before, and I had tried different grips, but something just felt a little bit different this time when I tried it, and I suspect that it was because of the increased arm speed, and I just hadn't noticed any meaningful difference before with a slower arm speed. But in any case, I started getting much quicker releases, and I broke 100 kilometers an hour for the first time with my putters. I actually got 107 one time, and I was flabbergasted with the 10 kilometers an hour improvement in one evening. You can see how surprised I am there. So grip really does make a difference. But obviously everyone's hands are so different and the discs are different, so it really is just a case of trying out all sorts of stuff and seeing what works best for you. In my case, I just found a better and more intuitive way for me to make it possible for the disc to swivel around the hand and the index finger like this as it leaves the hand. For some reason the driver shots are much more difficult for me to get as quick releases with. They always seem to come 5 to 10 kilometers slower than the putters. But at this point even the drivers were going like 95 to 98 kilometers an hour with good throws, and I even broke 100 a couple times. So I started going out to the field again to throw max distance shots. And I wasn't getting any new records at the beginning, but what I did notice is that the 120 meter mark was a lot easier to reach than before. It was starting to get much more consistent, which was the main goal, and I was really happy about that. And then one evening in early September, the throws were feeling really good, and I got this nice looking throw. That was nice. That was 131 meters, a new record by 5 meters. Not a huge increase in the record distance, but the most important thing for me was that the consistent distance had gone up so much. So I decided that it was time to get some actual numbers, so I went there once again a couple days later, and after some warm-up I threw 20 max distance shots. I wanted to know what percentage I can actually throw over 120 meters. It felt like I had a much more consistent release, but I wanted to get some actual numbers. So I measured all the throws, and here they are. As you can see, quite a lot of variance there still, but 9 out of 20 throws are over the threshold, which is 45%. So the consistency increased by 800%, which looks really nice in the title of the video, and it is really nice. But yeah, it's just, I'm now somewhat more consistent at throwing 120 meters. And though we already talked about some of the key points that helped me change my form in that direction, there's still a few more interesting things to look at. And we'll do that by taking a look at an interesting slow-mo comparison of an older and newer throw, where you can very clearly see all the differences and developments in my form over the last couple months. This is a throw from May 2022, on the same day I got the previous record, and this next one is a recent clip from September. This is on my new teepad, and I actually have the radar behind the net, and this putter throw clocked in at 108 kilometers an hour, which is the fastest I have ever thrown so far, so it was very nice to get this on a slow-mo video. So let's put this side to side and start from the power pocket. The first thing that I see here is on the left side my head is pointing much more forward, and you can also see how that trapezius we talked about earlier is much more tense. And at the release point you can really see how I'm following the throwing arm much more on the left side, whereas on the right side I have successfully let the right arm do its thing and the focus is in front of me and not following the disc, and then the head is coming around a bit later after the release. The second thing I notice is that the off-arm movement is much more efficient than before. We'll get to why it's more efficient, but first I want to touch on another mental image that helped me with the off-arm movement. So Jyrki talked about having the off arm in the pocket and doing almost like that pulling off the tablecloth magic trick. The idea being that by moving the hand back quickly you generate a little extra movement forward up here. And I took that and I started practicing with it, and it sort of turned into a bit of a different kind of mental image, where instead of pulling a tablecloth I'm swiveling the elbow again, this time like this, and at the same time straightening it out and jerking the left shoulder forward. It's hard to explain by words, but you can see what I'm doing. And I found that for me, thinking of the movement like that and practicing this in the context of a throw really helped me get rid of what I was doing before, which was consciously moving this left side forward when starting the pull through. In this older clip you can see how I'm consciously trying to swing my entire left side forward, which in theory could be a good thing because it can generate more power for the right arm. But it's just a wrong mental image for me, because what happens is that I turn too much forward before the release, and a lot of power is lost because of that. So comparing again to the new clip where I have the new mental image of the left arm swivel thing, you can see that combined with the trapezius looseness, it makes the torso rotation more efficient, and stops the active rotation before it goes too far, helps focusing the attention to the release point, and gives that little extra push to the left shoulder here, which adds a little extra power to the throw. A couple more interesting things in this comparison. If we look at the general direction of movement, sort of like the center of mass movement or something like that, we can see that in the old throw I come down like this towards the planting of the right foot. And then from here forward the direction of the general movement starts going up again, all the way to the release. And what that does is it sort of detaches me from the ground. You can see from the brace foot rotation that the pressure on the ground isn't very high, and I'm losing a lot of power to that. And in the new clip I still have the downwards movement leading to the plant, but I have almost no upward movement before the release. It only comes after the release, so I'm staying more grounded. You can sort of see from the brace foot how there's more pressure being applied to the ground, and so also more power being transferred to the throw. In general, I feel a little more relaxed now when throwing, and I don't need to think about as many things. It feels a little more like being a passenger in the vehicle of a throw rather than being the driver like before. And that certainly comes from the fact that all the different parts of this complex movement have turned into more automatic sequences that I don't have to think about as much while throwing. And that's the beautiful paradox of the disc golf form, is that the goal is to make the throw biomechanically efficient and instinctive and subconscious. But in order to do that, you need to do a lot of very conscious and analytical training. Well, you don't have to, but I think for many people it's the quickest road to an efficient form. And you can easily get stuck with bad practices if you don't do any analytical training. So I guess I want to offer some consoling words to anyone who's struggling with the analytical training and how it seems to take the life out of your throw, and the throw starts to feel stiff or unnatural. It's just a necessary part of the process on the way to a natural, efficient form. What I did is I just kept reminding myself about working towards looseness and fluidity. And also that this looseness and fluidity doesn't come with ripping the shots with everything you have, but that it's better to practice a lot of the 70 to 80% shots with focus on control and ease. I'm still definitely not all the way there. It still feels a little unnatural at times, a little forced here and there, but at least I'm starting to see the light at the end of the tunnel. Okay, what? Thought tinkering is back? For the more recent disc golf audience, thought tinkering is this end part of my videos where I get more philosophical and talk about all kinds of things, not necessarily even related to the video topic. Though this time we are going to stay sort of related to the video because we're going to be talking about setting and achieving personal goals. And I'm hoping to be able to offer something fresh and interesting. So I just want to say to you, you can do anything if you really set your mind to it. You just have to continue pushing through all the different... Is that a good joke? I don't know, probably not. But yeah, you cannot do everything. Let's start with that. It's kind of funny how often motivational speakers just casually leave that part completely out. Like, yeah, let's not talk about that part. It's kind of awkward. It's supposed to be inspiring, you know. And to me, it's one of the more interesting parts, like, where's the limit? What can I do? What can I not do? What's reasonable to try to achieve and what's not reasonable? What are the risks? Are they worth taking? Why is this important to me? Etc., etc. It can be quite a riddle sometimes, and I think there are a few points of view that are not talked about all that much, and that could help many people. So often goals are seen as this tangible, concrete thing. You know, like being able to throw a disc 120 meters. And then you devise a plan and execute long enough that you get there. But to me it's not that one-dimensional. Like how I see it is, yes, there is this real-world, tangible element to it, but it's almost just a secondary thing. And the most important thing for me is, why do I want to achieve this certain goal? And especially, what kind of things does the journey itself bring out in me? You always hear about how the journey is the most important thing, not the destination. And there's huge wisdom behind that cliche, but the interpretation is often left very thin, so I want to attempt to bring out some more detail in it. And a good place to start is the fact that a goal is an imaginary concept in my thoughts. When I achieve a long-term goal, nothing changes in the real physical world. There's only my thoughts about having achieved that goal. And I can derive a feeling of satisfaction from that thought, but it tends to be pretty short-lived after I have achieved that goal. So you can see how it makes sense to not think that much about the goal, but to just try to enjoy the journey itself, because that can provide a longer lasting sense of satisfaction. But to me there's much more to it than that. You know, sometimes I get this drive to do something particular, to explore some interesting part of my personal life map that's still white and doesn't have anything on it. In the case of disc golf, I just happened to go play a few rounds with my brother a couple years ago. They were not my first times playing, but for some reason that time I got curious about the mechanics of the backhand throw. And I looked up some videos on YouTube and I found Jome's Pro and started watching the tournaments and started playing more rounds myself, and then just fell head first into the abyss of the backhand form. Something in that really fascinated me, and I didn't quite know what it was, and I still don't know quite what it is. but the fascination hasn't died ever since. In the first disc golf journey video, I said that I always had the dream of being able to throw 120 meters. And while it's true that I had that thought very early on, in the video it was mostly just to paint a nice narrative. In reality, that wasn't really my goal. And this is where we get to the fact that I didn't have a specific real-world goal at all. My goal was to dive deeper into the backhand form because it seemed to be calling me for some reason. And I don't mean that I got this feverish urge to explore the backhand form. Especially in the beginning, it was just some recurring thoughts about the mechanics. I started to visualize disc flight paths when I was out and about in all kinds of places. I started doing these dry runs whenever I was bored somewhere, that sort of thing. And I try to be sensitive to these kind of signs. And whenever that kind of stuff happens, I try to grab onto it right away if I have the opportunity. So my goal in these types of things is to feed the curiosity and explore these callings until they run out. In practice, that of course includes making specific real-world sub-goals that you go towards and can achieve. But the main thing is to keep digging around the curiosity and the calling, and seeing if it still has other things to offer. I believe that practically all of the great achievements of humanity have been achieved because of this very simple, primal curiosity about things. That feels a little comical to say in a disc golf video. You know, hucking pieces of plastic in the air isn't gonna cure cancer anytime soon. But remember, curing cancer is not the goal. Digging around is the goal. I think that a pure, driven curiosity and true open-mindedness have intrinsic value, so it doesn't matter what it's about. And for me at least, getting those big or small aha moments as you are digging around and getting to paint something new onto the life map is one of the most satisfying things there is in life. And it's a very repeatable and a very consistent source of satisfaction. You're not gonna run out of new things to try and new things to learn. Also, I believe that nurturing that curiosity and systematically digging around interesting things tends to make you grow as a person and tends to lead to unforeseen developments and new opportunities, new paths that you wouldn't have been able to plan for if you always just rigidly worked towards preset goals. That's why it's important to be open-minded and ready to change direction at any time. A determined process of digging around does inevitably include unpleasant moments and frustrations also. There's been many a moment where I have to drag myself to continue with some difficult part of the process. Or I end up throwing max distance shots at night in rainy weather, and instead of getting any new records, I just lose my favorite drivers in a river. And those moments are frustrating, but they're usually also good learning experiences, at least in managing negative emotions. And whenever that happens, I just come back to the calling to see if it's still there. And if it is, I'll find the will to continue somewhere. Maybe it's the next day, the next week, but it'll come. And sometimes the most difficult part of the process is the decision of whether to continue pushing through despite the difficulties, or to give up on that thing, to be able to allocate your resources in some more productive directions. There's a very fine and blurry line between a very determined and driven curious person and a stupidly stubborn stuck person. When I was making the genetic simulation, at one point I was real close to actually giving up on the whole thing, because I had been stuck for weeks and it didn't seem to be getting anywhere. And I'm glad I didn't give up, because I got it working in the end. But sometimes you need to do that. Not everything is always gonna work out. But I will say that in my experience, the probability of things working out in the end is usually higher than my estimations. So I found it useful to keep pushing for a while, even if it starts to feel a little fruitless. And in the case of the simulator, for example, the thing that finally got me on the right path was a conversation with my wife. And she doesn't know almost anything about programming, but when I was venting to her about the things that were causing the problems, she listened and asked a lot of questions about it. And as an outsider to the problem, she ended up pointing out a couple new possible directions that I hadn't really thought about before. And that was enough to get me on the right track. And that's definitely not a single occurrence. I've found that whenever I'm seriously stuck with a thing and considering giving up on it, it's always been super helpful to have a conversation about it with someone else that's completely outside of the problem. It's real easy to get stuck with a personal tunnel vision, and new perspectives, even from someone who doesn't understand any of the technicalities, can be really helpful. Okay, I've been rambling for quite a while now. I hope you found this interesting or helpful in some way. And if you're still watching, thank you very much. I really appreciate it, and I hope you have a fantastic day filled with curiosity. I'll see you later.